Welcome to Revisiting the Vault, a podcast where we're looking at the history of art, animation, music, and just about everything else, but through a Disney lens. I am Mary Ratliff. I am a writer, filmmaker, visual art nerd.
And I'm Gretchen Harwell. I am not really any of those things. I like to sew. I like fashion. I'm a vet tech. I'm a mom. I'm married to a filmmaker, but I wouldn't call myself a film nerd by any stretch. So, all those things.
Married to a filmmaker gives you some credentials. It means you have someone to call when there are debates at work, which is what my husband does. So.
Actually, what it means is, as a team, we are killer at trivia.
Yeah. To reintroduce the project, we are watching all of the Disney feature-length animated films in theatrical release order. We started with Snow White. We've been going for a little while now. We've made our way to 1953.
That's right.
And Peter Pan.
Oh.
I think I came up with 3 warnings we need to give right off the bat. Warning number 1. Holy content warning, Batman.
Yes.
This is a film that has a content warning on Disney Plus, and it should have been in red. Should have been like, no, really, guys.
Yes.
We mean it this time.
But yeah, for real, maybe skip this one.
Right. Obviously, we record a very long conversation and edit it, so I don't know what all is going to come up. But I apologize in advance if in discussing this, we have to use some of the language and terminology and stereotypes that are used in this film because they are offensive, and we have to talk about it.
Right. To be clear, we will be quoting the movie, not making things up.
Right.
So it's not like we would use this terminology of our own free will.
Exactly. Thing number 2, I'm going to say that if Peter Pan is somehow a beloved part of your childhood, and it really means something to you for some reason, please go ahead and skip this episode.
Yeah.
We are not going to judge you. We are not going to say anything about you as a person, because there are plenty of things in my life that I love that probably are a whole big mess. But warning number 3, we hated this movie.
Oh my God, I was so angry watching this movie. I watched it with my daughter, and I did not actually get any notes from her on it this time, but I watched it.
I'm sorry, Ingrid.
She was reading my notes, and afterwards she was like, "What's a psychopath?" And I was like, Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell's a psychopath.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I watched it with her, and we had to stop. I stopped and took a 2-week break and came back and finished it. And I'm still mad. I was finishing it, and I was like, nope, still mad. I still hate this movie.
I don't have particularly fond memories of Peter Pan in the way that some people do, or in the way that I have of other Disney movies. Like, it's not my Cinderella. It's not my Sleeping Beauty. It's not the one where we wore out the VHS. It did not come out on VHS until 1990, which means I would have been 10. It did have theatrical releases in 1982 and 1989, which, if I'm remembering correctly, our hometown movie theater was still open in 1989. I think it closed around 89, 90. So I probably would have gone to go see it in the theater.
I can safely say I had never seen this movie.
I think I probably didn't give this movie more than a second's thought for decades. Did not really recall any of the problems in Peter Pan until Joe Wright was working on Pan, because they cast Rooney Mara. That was in 2015. When they cast Rooney Mara as Tiger Lily, Native American groups were like, "That's really not cool, guys." And at that point, by 2015, I very much was paying attention to problems with racism in casting.
Yeah.
And whitewashing and race bending and the things like that happen. And so that is what really brought it to my attention oh, by the way, this is a thing in Peter Pan where they have these Native Americans. And by the way, the animated movie actually has a whole lot of big issues. I remember that I didn't really... Peter Pan has always been vaguely creepy. Like the character.
Yes. Very much so, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that was something, it was funny because when we had D&D and the different people in our group were getting there, I would always be mid-rant when they were walking in the door. And every single person, as soon as I said, like, oh, I watched Peter Pan and it's more messed up than you remember, they were like, well, yeah, he steals children. All of them, as adults, were like, Peter Pan, the character, is not a good guy.
Definitely not.
Which I found really interesting, Because I don't think that J.M. Barrie intended him necessarily to be. Peter Pan, the character, was originally created in a section of a series of stories that were put in a book called The Little White Bird in 1902, and then was developed into a stage play in 1904, and then a book. So Peter Pan has, from the beginning, been a theatrical production, which I found very interesting. And that original stage play, that is where the tradition of having George Darling and Captain Hook be played by the same actor comes from.
Yeah, I read that's one thing that they kept was the two voices were the same actor, and that was a holdover from the play. I think that was a kind of a cool touch. I hated this movie so much that, truthfully, by the point I learned that, I was like, okay, well, great, good for you guys. It still sucks.
It becomes hard for me to appreciate things like it opens again with the Mary Blair watercolor style drawings that are really beautiful and all of that stuff. And it makes it hard for me to appreciate the things that they did well.
Yes.
Because the script is trash.
The whole movie is trash.
This is what we ended up declaring it when I was ranting about it to my friend Jane on Sunday, was that it was taking Edwardian era British sexism and racism as filtered through a 1950s American lens.
Yes. I have a little bit more to say that, but I want to save it for at the end where Wendy talks about our mothers. And all that kind of thing. So for right now, I will just say, I agree.
So let's, I don't even know where to start. I don't know where to start. So let's talk about the sexism.
Yeah.
Every single female character in this movie is obsessed with Peter frickin' Pan.
And he is an asshole.
He's an asshole.
God.
He's not interesting. He's got donkey teeth. You and I both thought he looked like Lampwick from Pinocchio. We both picked up on it.
Yeah. He also kind of sounds like him.
Yeah, I was like, he has a lampy face.
If you look at Bobby Driscoll, he was not unattractive. The picture of him that you can find on IMDb, there's also pictures of him as a child. I looked through a bunch. When you see him, he is kind of the face that was considered pretty attractive in the early 50s. He's got the hairstyle and all the stuff.
I'm looking at this picture that I don't know when this picture... Oh, it says the picture's from 1950.
So he would have been 13.
He would have been 13.
He was born in 37. Yeah.
He is Leave It to Beaver.
Yes.
He is that very wholesome Americana look.
Big teeth.
Yeah. That when they translated it to the character design for Peter Pan the character, it went weird.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's just a way that, as a modern audience, that we're seeing it, that we just have different beauty standards or something.
Maybe so, but all the same.
Does he have pointed ears? I'm fairly sure he has pointed ears. Yes.
I think so, yeah. Which, for the record, Bobby Driscoll did not. It's the one thing they changed.
Peter Pan is very much drawn and done like Puck.
Yes.
In this movie. He feels like they're trying to do a Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream thing with him. Whether or not that was intentional, I don't know.
I don't think they did. I mean, I could be wrong, but the stuff I looked at the Peter Pan wikis, I looked at the Disney fandom site, I looked at all those sites, and I couldn't find anything about that. And to be fair, also, just like you, I looked at them, but didn't look that deep because I was looking for specific answers to questions I had. And I just know he's kind of an a-hole.
They intentionally gave him the look as a nearly teenage boy. He's supposed to be somewhat ageless. From what I was reading about The Little White Bird, that is the most lighthearted of the stories in The Little White Bird. It does not sound like J.M. Barrie was actually a kid's fantasy author. He was not a children's book guy.
Lewis Carroll, he was not.
No. He was a Scottish playwright. Very surprised that he was Scottish because there is so much in this movie that I'm assuming came from the original book that is so English. I was like, oh my God.
Well, and he was born in 1860,
yeah.
So he was raised hardcore Victorian. Some of this stuff sort of makes sense. His story, this movie might take place in the Edwardian era, but I don't know when his original story was set. But if it came out in, 1904?
Yeah, 1904 was the original West End stage play, and I believe it was 1911 was when it...
Right.
Yeah, 1911 was when Peter and Wendy was published.
So, and Queen Victoria died in 1901. So, technically, yes, we're Edwardian by now, but really?
You've seen Black Panther, right?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I told you I don't watch movies.
I know. No, it's fine. I just felt like that was one that might have percolated up. Basic premise is that the African country of Wakanda has willingly cut themselves off from society for hundreds of years, basically. So there's this character played by Martin Freeman that when he goes to Wakanda, Shiori constantly refers to him as colonizer.
Yes.
And he tells her, he's like, my name is, and honestly, I've even forgotten the character's name because that bit is so funny. But he's like, this is my name. And she's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I just started calling John Darling colonizer.
Yes. Yes.
Because he is. But yeah, specifically, it was reminding me of a few particular things. The British Empire colonized India in 1858. Peter Pan, the play, the book, all of that, would have been created at the height of British imperialism. And it freaking shows.
Yes, it really does. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, so much. I don't know.
I mean, we've already gotten distracted from the sexism. It's so...
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know how we got here from the sexism.
I know.
The problem is this is all just one big problematic potluck of a movie.
I know. It was every second where you were like, maybe we're moving away from the frickin' mess of the scene to do something else for a little while. Sure, they moved away from that mess to pick up the other mess.
Right.
I knew going in, again, because of the whole thing with Pan, that there were a lot of problematic depictions of Native Americans in this movie. I knew that this probably was going to be one of the most, if not the most racist movie that we were going to watch this whole time.
Yes.
Somehow, I definitely was not expecting for the people to be like, we've got so much racism in this movie.
Let's temper it.
Let's make sure we have just as much sexism.
Yes.
That it is exactly the same levels of gross. Absolutely no female character in this movie has any character whatsoever except adoring Peter Pan or being a mother. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Or sometimes both.
Yeah, and then Wendy is both at once most of the time. So you have Mary Darling. I was going to be like, she's the only person in this movie that's not really a problem, but she's making apologies for George Darling, who is the biggest
yes
dick. He is just absolutely terrible. The worst part for me is the introduction of Wendy, the character, is that George Darling has gone into the nursery. John and Michael are playing pirates, and he's looking for his cufflinks, because God forbid a man know where his own stuff is. He's running around. He's getting mad about something. I don't even remember what anymore. And I don't remember if John says, Wendy was telling us that, or whatever. Somebody mentions Wendy.
Right.
And George immediately was like, Wendy, I knew this was your fault. First of all, you lost your own actually, no, he didn't lose his own damn cufflinks. Michael stole them to make them very treasured. Actually, we don't know if Michael stole them or if he lost them and Michael found them. But anyway, I'm going to give Michael, the toddler, the benefit of the doubt.
I was going to say, give the baby the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, he didn't steal them. He just found them, where George carelessly left them somewhere and expected Mary or one of the servants to pick them up and put them back in the box, because obviously that's what they're going to do. He's a very, very busy, posh British asshole.
Oh my God, I hated him so much.
He's mean to his kids. He's completely distracted, and you don't even figure out what he's looking for half the time, because he's just bumbling around not talking in complete sentences and expecting everyone to know what he's saying and what he needs.
Right. And he's sort of making messes. Yeah. And then angry that there are messes, which is another colonizer move.
Right. You've got Nana the dog, who is the only unproblematic thing in this whole movie, who cares deeply about these children, and who has made the nursery nice and neat and tidy, and George just keeps knocking shit over. Mm-hmm. And then he has absolutely no situational awareness whatsoever, trips over the dog, falls over, and then he sees everyone go, oh no, and he's like, oh, my family is about to come, land adoration on me. Finally.
And they're all worried about Nana.
And they all go over and poor Nana, and he gets so mad, he throws the dog out of the house.
He's upset that nobody's worried about him, so he takes it out on the dog. Peter does this later on. Mm-hmm. It's just this whole over and over again. Here's what I have to say about Nana. We could list the number of things we liked in this movie, and it would be a pretty short list. I liked some of the opening animation. Mm-hmm. I thought that Catherine Beaumont, which was Wendy's voice actress and live action model, in Alice, she was like, yeah, I'm not a singer. And so here we are. She did a much better job in this movie with singing. I mean, she's good, don't get me wrong, but like she stepped up her singing game. So good for you, Catherine Beaumont. And then Nana. I like Nana.
Yeah. I like the teddy bear. The teddy bear was super cute.
My thoughts about Nana were like, why can my dogs not be more like her?
Yeah.
The late, great, most perfect Potato was a little bit more like her. And then I was like, well, what kind of dog is she? Because her scale is so weird. I looked it up. So when J.M. Barrie wrote the book, or at some point he had a Newfoundland, and so people were like, oh no, he was a Newfoundland. And then I saw other stuff, because I wrote down, is she a Clumber Spaniel? She didn't really look like a Clumber Spaniel, but she's the size of one. Supposedly she's a Saint Bernard. But if that's the case, she's tiny.
She's not quite got the Saint Bernard face. It's close. Nana is a Nana dog. That's what she is. Mm-hmm. She's a Nana dog.
And she wears a little nurse
the hat.
Like,
oh my goodness.
Yes.
That dog.
She's the one non-problematic character in this movie. I mean, I guess Michael's okay because he's a baby.
Right. I mean, he does some stupid stuff, but he's supposed to be, 4, 5? No, not even 4.
I would say 2 or 3.
He's just past walking. Yeah, he's real little. But yeah, the crocodile's the real MVP, and Nana is wonderful, and there's nothing wrong with Nana.
That's it. That's the end.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah, the crocodile's great.
They actually did a version where Captain Hook is very clearly eaten by the crocodile at the end, who is apparently called TikTok Croc. Or just TikTok is his name, which I'm fine with that. But they apparently did a version where he is definitively eaten.
Good.
But Walt Disney himself insisted on keeping Hook alive and said the audience will get to liking Hook and they don't want to see him killed.
Untrue.
I don't know if you noticed, but my notes were 100% me saying, have you eaten him yet? No, stay down. Stay in the crocodile.
Yes.
Just over, like, every time the crocodile showed up, I was like, just eat him already.
Yes, that's how I felt. I was like, God, especially, we're kind of jumping around here, but when it comes to the end, honestly, with this movie, who cares?
Let's be honest. If you want to talk about the plot of Peter Pan and, like, the character development or whatever, what are you going to talk about?
Right.
Peter Pan he gains a slight new appreciation for the people around him and learning that he is not the only thing in the world.
Does he, though?
Maybe. Probably not. Definitely doesn't in the book.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, not really. Tinkerbell, apparently, canonically, at this point, because fairies are so small, they only have room for one emotion at a time. And so Tinkerbell is incapable of really learning to be any more than she is. John had a rousing, wonderful adventure and is probably going to go on to be part of the British colony somewhere. Absolutely going to think that he is a naturalist. You can tell that John 100% thought that he was, like, a brilliant British anthropologist.
He had opinions on the Boer War, for sure.
Yeah. And,
he for sure did.
Michael, he's 3. He's barely even going to remember any of this. Wendy, I guess her character advancement is that she decides it will be okay to grow up when it's time to grow up.
Maybe, yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, that's it. That's all we got. Nothing happens that is, like, consequential.
You're not wrong, except that there are some things. First of all, what I knew about this movie, other than, Peter Pan is in it, and the darling kids are in it, and all that stuff. Years ago, my brother-in-law, our niece, is a couple years older than our daughter, and they had watched it, and he was like, man, Tinkerbell's kind of a psycho. And then never watched it. I mean, and like based on that, really, I was like, well, I haven't seen it, and I'm fine so far, and I could just keep not seeing it and be good. And I kind of wish I was still in that boat, but here we are.
I know.
But I knew that going in. I was like, oh, Tinkerbell's not going to be the cool version from post-2000 that I have seen with my daughter in these other movies.
Yeah.
Those movies, they're not perfect, but boy, they're better than this.
Like I mentioned to you, I watched the first Tinkerbell animated movie last night just to get to wash the taste out of my mouth.
Little palate cleanser.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it is actually, it's a kid's movie. It's a kid's animated movie.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It is fine. So anyway, the short version of the plot is these kids, they go to Neverland. They are in constant danger. They nearly get burned at the stake. Tinkerbell, I think, does she try to drown Wendy at one point?
Oh, she tries to drown her. She tries to get her shot. She tries everything.
There's a lot of stuff. And then Wendy finally is like, enough is enough. This is terrible. We're going home. And the kids are like, no, we don't want to. And she says some super racist stuff. Peter's mad because they don't all want to stay with him forever. And like, sorry, Peter, but you're terrible. Nobody wants to stay with you forever. The thing is, like, if you really think about it, do you want to live with your, let's call him 12-year-old self?
Yeah.
Forever?
Mm.
No. So they eventually have to fight Captain Hook to get away. They do. They go home. And at the end of the movie, all these terrible things have happened. They were in constant danger. Mm-hmm. And she tells her mother, oh, we had the most wonderful adventure. Did you though? Because you didn't seem to be enjoying yourself at all.
Yeah. But there was a cute boy.
But was he cute? Because he's not.
Yeah, he's not. And he's mean to her the entire time. But she's in love with him.
He's shitty.
He's terrible. Peter Pan treats her terribly. They do a weird thing that and this plays up again actually in Hook, which I also watched Hook yesterday, the 1991 Spielberg film, is that Neverland starts to make you forget.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about that too, because they were there for, what, a day? Michael's like, aren't you our mother? And she's like, no. And then he's describing Nana, and he's like, did our mother have silky ears? No, that's our dog. What the hell is happening? Okay, so now that I know that, because that's not something that really gets brought up in the movie.
No. They have it done with Michael, and you start to wonder, is Michael forgetting home? Like the Lost Boys, they seem to have been like, did I have a mother, or I had a mother?
Yeah, one of them said something like, I feel like I had a mother once. Yeah.
You don't know how long the Lost Boys have been there. They could have been there like hundreds of years. So you're like, oh, I don't know. But John says something that makes you think that his memory is slipping too.
Yeah.
Because at first you're like, well, Michael, he's 3. He's confused maybe. But no 3-year-old I have ever met. And Aurora is 3 right now. Aurora absolutely 100% knows who her mother is.
Yes.
Her mother's the most important person in the world. And her favorite person. So 3-year-olds are way too advanced for that. In Hook, they definitely really go into the fact that Neverland makes you forget. They don't explain it. It just happens a lot in the movie, which is
Right.
This is not a podcast about the movie Hook, but that was one of the flaws in it, is that there are quite a few things where things just sort of happen and you're supposed to just accept that they're happening. They're doing this thing where Neverland, like, makes you forget. At the same time, I feel that is a thing where everyone who has done any version of Peter Pan uses that to a narrative advantage when they're in a corner.
Sure.
And doesn't use it when it isn't convenient.
Exactly. And like, okay, so how is it that Wendy isn't forgetting? Is it because she's older and she has already sort of started to accept that maybe she's going to grow up? What is it that sets her apart from the rest? Let's talk about these Native Americans for just a moment. They all know who they are.
Right.
And they are grown up.
But are they native to Neverland? Like, that's the part, like, I just start to want to know about.
And they're grown-ups.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So we have, Pixies are born fully grown. Even in the original, that's a thing. The way they tell it in Hook is actually the first time the first baby laughed, it broke into 1,000 pieces, and that became all of the fairies.
Fine.
In the Tinkerbell movies, it's every time a baby laughs for the first time, a new fairy is born. So fairies are born fully grown. They die when people stop believing in them. They don't really have a growth cycle. Okay. The pirates, there's an implication that the pirates leave Neverland to go to the real world and raid and come back.
Yeah.
Because they talk about, like, the Spanish Main and a couple other things. Captain Hook went to Eton.
He is dressed like a 17th century nobleman.
Apparently his character design is 100% based off of a Spanish king.
Fine.
Sure, it doesn't make any damn sense, but okay. I went into a whole thing of trying to figure out Captain Hook's sword, because I in our notes I called it a foil, and then I was like, it's not a foil, what is it? And it was so funny, because I spent like 10 minutes on this research, because this is the kind of thing that I got distracted by instead of the movie, because the movie was so bad. But then my husband came in, and I was like, sorry, I've just gotten completely distracted by trying to figure out what kind of sword Captain Hook has, and he's like, it's a rapier. Yeah,
I looked at it, and I was like, okay. Yeah, I went down a rabbit hole trying to figure out freaking Smee's blunderbuss of a gun.
And Smee has a cutlass. Most of the pirates have cutlasses, which is accurate.
Yeah.
Pirates would have cutlasses or some kind of gun, probably a much smaller one. It's got to be the blunderbuss just because it's funny. I'm assuming.
I did go on a rabbit hole of pirate weaponry.
I got barely into it, and they were like, they just used whatever they could find because they didn't have money.
Yes, so they would have used a blunderbuss because back when blunderbusses were the convenient gun, but they wouldn't have been using a blunderbuss. When pistols came around, they were easier because they're smaller. Also, his gun is not really a blunderbuss, it's called a dragon. And it's like this shorter, smaller version of a blunderbuss. And they were usually engraved with a dragon. The whole thing is so weird.
Everything in Neverland was done without any idea of, like, it's a fantasy world, sure, fine. Doesn't need historical accuracy because of that. There's a level where I can understand not caring about being historically accurate or being of a particular time period for the pirates and the things in Neverland. I mean, there's mermaids and pixies, like, honestly. Well, also...
Right.
Is Tinkerbell a fairy or a pixie? Those are two very different things, but they're used interchangeably, and that made me crazy. Anyway, so you've got fairies, you've got little boys who never grow up, but my problem with that is that Captain Hook is an Englishman. Captain Hook is an Englishman who went to Eton, who was basically a nobleman, and then ended up in Neverland somehow. And there have been so many versions of how that happened. But at the same time, is he, like, going and being a pirate, coming back to Neverland for a month or two, or a year, or whatever, and, like, he doesn't age while he's in Neverland, but they're aging while they're out in the real world? There's just so many... The Native Americans... I keep calling out Joe Wright for this, and I feel kind of bad because he actually got a lot of nasty hate when Pan came out, to the point where he almost quit directing entirely, and I think that that's a little bit too much. There were a lot of people who made decisions when Pan was made. So the people who were making decisions for that movie, one of the things that they tried to say to excuse the fact that they were doing this and that to make it okay was that Tiger Lily and her tribe are not actual Native Americans. They're from Neverland. They are a native tribe of Neverland. That is not in the text. There's also not anything that says that that's not it, other than John saying, oh, Blackfoot tribe. And I'm just like, oh, God, just shut up. You know, it's a joke because he sees a footprint and it's a black footprint, so it's the Blackfoot tribe. Get it? Get it?
Yeah.
Anyway, I did not have the heart to even begin to look up all of the ways that the Native Americans in this movie were insulting, inaccurate stereotypes. There's no way that you could take what is presented there and try to actually map it onto any Native American tribe that actually existed. You're not going to find any that had this style of outfit and also had this style of home and this style of the totem poles. All of that was just a pastiche of stuff that these white dudes thought looked native. They're completely misusing the war bonnets. You wonder why white women wear them to Coachella. Meh.
Right.
And it's because of things like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like the Native Americans in this movie map to anything, because they don't, because it's racist.
Yes. It is a group of white dudes in California's kind of confused conceptions.
Southern California,
and specifically people who never probably had any interaction with any native groups.
Right. It's one of those things that, like, if we started to get into the depictions of Native Americans in Hollywood, first of all, we'd be here for a month, but there are documentaries out there that have explored this. There was one I watched, and the name has just slipped right out of my head. I'll try to remember later.
Naturally. Americans,
for a very long time, and you know what, we're probably going to get into this in however many episodes we have until we get to Pocahontas. Anyway, white Americans, up to today probably, but definitely in my childhood, were like, Native Americans always lived in teepees. They always wore the specific leather outfit and the leather moccasins. They always had the eagle feathers in their hair. They always did this. They always had war paint. You know, they're always this and this and this. And it's because of things like Peter Pan.
Right.
That we have those misconceptions. And the other thing is that makes the Native Americans into a homogenous group.
It completely strips away their individuality among the different groups.
There were hundreds of tribes with hundreds and thousands of traditions.
Even beyond that, there's even a kind of a white colonialist and American idea of what America was like before, pre-Columbian America. Oh, it's just this pristine wilderness and the native peoples just wandered through it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you're actually stripping away a lot of credit that they deserve. They were actively managing the land.
Right.
They were doing controlled burns. They were doing all this stuff.
Native Americans had agricultural systems.
Yes.
They just didn't look like European agricultural systems, so they didn't see it.
Right. It's things like this movie and a lot of TV and movie productions from this era before and after that are just like, nope, this is what they did. They rode horses and...
This is 1953. This is the height of the American Western and the cowboys and Indians narrative on the silver screen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's just... But I am starting to wonder if John's character was written the way he was as a joke against that type of English schoolboy.
And possibly so.
Maybe I'm being too charitable.
Maybe it was a class thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was like, well, this is what people are going to recognize as an English schoolboy.
Very specifically, J.M. Barrie based characters in this on... And the reason he started writing this story was because of the Llewellyn Davies boys. A little bit similar, actually, to Lewis Carroll at that point, where he had a friendship with just some, young men in the neighborhood that he started telling them stories. And then that sort of became this. So, it's possible a little bit was because of the way that they played or who they were. I don't know. But it's just very much like John is a very particular British schoolboy character. From the moment he starts speaking and he has that accent, I almost know exactly who he is.
He's a little know-it-all, yes.
Yeah. As soon as he goes to get an umbrella and a top hat before they fly out the window to Neverland, you know everything you need to know about John Darling.
Right. Yes.
He is going to grow up to be George Darling. 100%. And John Darling, one of the reasons I am so mad at him is because he is the one that is the vehicle for 75% of the racism.
Yeah. It's his little know-it-all attitude, and he is educating the boys in Neverland and Michael
about a tribe that they constantly interact with.
Yes, exactly.
Talk about mansplaining.
John Darling is a mansplainer.
John Darling is a mansplainer, and he's constantly being and I know that it's because it's in service of a joke, and I understand that there's a little bit of subversion of what he's saying in the moment, but he's saying that this tribe are cunning, but they're not very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And so all we need to do, because we are smarter, me, the 8-year-old, with my 3-year-old brother, and these lost boys of indeterminate age who are wearing animal skin pajamas.
I had problems with that.
Yeah, we are intelligent. So, what we need to do is sneak in and surround them and take them by surprise. Which, of course, at that moment is where they realize that the Native Americans have surrounded them and take them by surprise.
Right.
Okay, fine. But you could make that joke without having the posh British kids say that they are cunning but not intelligent.
Exactly. That's the thing. Is you can make that joke and not be quite so friggin' racist. You could just leave that line out and say, hey, I know how we get them. Right. We're going to do this thing. And as you're saying that, they're doing that thing. You leave out the super racist joke and boom, it's done.
You also can skip the part where the baby puts on war paint and starts doing a tomahawk chop with the little war whooping thing.
I just had problems with all of this. I have problems with giving children tomahawks, all of that stuff. It's funny, though, because you mentioned John Darling's character design. And it's of course he's the little shit that's got the monocle and the top hat and the umbrella. Honestly, when you look at that drawing, you know he is modeling his own outfit after his father. And like you said, he's going to grow up to be like his father. Yeah. And then I was thinking about Peter Pan's design, his whole character design. Physically, he looks like he's 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm. Which means he's older than Wendy.
Yeah. He sounds like he's 16 or 17. He's got a deep teenager voice. It works because he's old enough to be a really self-centered teenager.
Right.
And young enough to still be immature.
There's a tone to it that, again, I'm being charitable right now, but where if you want to take this as a metaphor, and you want to talk about it being a story about growing up and coming of age or whatever, that Peter is Wendy's first crush. It's implied that she's around 12 or 13 years old, but it's not stated in pretty much anything how old she definitely is. He's a little bit older than her. He's like a daredevil. He's a little bit of a bad boy. It's not that out of the box for a proper good girl like Wendy Darling to fall for the bad kid from the wrong side of the track.
Yes.
But at the same time, that is me being charitable and reading something into this that is not fully supported by the text. Because, for one thing, this movie starts with an opening line that I actually think is one of the best opening lines.
Yes, all this has happened before.
All of this has happened before, and it will happen again. This time it happened in London. Oh my gosh, that is good. And that's gotta be from the original play. What a fantastic opening. Anyway, when the movie starts, you've got this narrator who's telling you how the different people in the Darling household do or do not believe in Peter Pan. And that Mrs. Darling believes that Peter Pan is just like a symbol of youth. You know, he's a story. Wendy, I don't remember what they say about all the rest of them, but like Wendy, though, really fully believes, and that she is the expert in Peter Pan. She knows everything about him.
Right.
Well, then you find out, like, after George has his whole fit and the parents leave the children at home alone with the dog outside instead of in the nursery. Why not? Maybe there's a servant in the kitchen that we don't know about. As they're leaving, she tells Mary Darling that she's already found Peter Pan's shadow. Of course she believes in him! She has actual evidence! Anyway, it's just one of those things that, like, felt inconsistent, because there's just a lot of inconsistent.
I think, for me, I kind of have the feeling that in the same way that Walt Disney was in love with the story of Alice in Wonderland, and he wanted to make it, and he wanted to make it, and wanted to make it, and then he finally got to, this feels like he was like, ooh, we could make a lot with this. And then they were like, yeah, let's have Captain Hook look like a Spanish king from the 1600s. Let's have, gives me a blunderbuss. And they just kind of were going whole hog on all the stuff. Let's put it all in there and make it, because there's no rules in Neverland.
Right.
I will also say, I was thinking about, I don't know when specific world building with rules became a thing that mattered to people.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. Definitely, in film at this point, you've got fantasy film from the very beginning of film. The invention of film more or less started with fantasy film. I mean, the Lumiere brothers, that's what they were doing. But at the same time, when you watch Voyage to the Moon, if you're looking for something with rules, you're not going to find it. I will say that I went on a weird tangent on pirates today, and I looked up when Treasure Island was written. And Treasure Island quite predates this. Oh, Robert Louis Stevenson was also Scottish, by the way. So Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Treasure Island, originally published in 1883. J.M. Barrie probably, like, grew up on Treasure Island.
Yeah, he was born in 1860. Barrie was.
I mean, Treasure Island probably would have been amazing. And not that I have read the original text of Treasure Island in its entirety. I feel like I've only read parts of it. I have read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I have read some other stuff from around then, now that I think about it. And I do think that there were stories with sort of consistent rules and consistent world building by that point.
Yes, but a lot of those stories are set in their contemporaneous context.
Right.
And they add fantasy elements. They are not set in Neverland. I'm even more talking about specifically, like, even in the Disney library of movies. When did there become rules about world building? Because there sure as crap are none in this.
Right.
I wonder if Disney Studios, to some extent, made a mess of this story. Or if this story was kind of a hot mess and they just pulled what they could from it into the movie.
I did read that Walt Disney apparently really wanted Peter Pan to be one of his first or second. Like, how many movies are going to be... This was intended to be the second animated feature, but it got delayed because... It feels like everything has that attached. I wonder how many of them that's actually true of. We very obviously, and we've talked about this over and over again, where we can see the technological advancements and the artistic advancements of the animation in these Disney movies.
Right.
There are things about the way they draw George Darling moving that very much reminded me of things that are going to be in, like, 101 Dalmatians. and stuff that's like coming up soon, but not quite, but they are really not good at plot.
No, yes, you're right.
They're not good at the actual writing at this point.
We keep coming back to that. You're absolutely right. That's why I was saying, is it that this, like, Barry's story is just a mess, and they took all, like, as much as they could and crammed it into a movie? Or is his story a little bit tighter than that, and they just made a mess of it? Or are they just not good at picking their stories?
Yes, I think that there are some problems maybe with them picking things, partially because I think that they're picking things that were beloved by Walt Disney in his childhood, quite a lot of these.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is coming into this with very particular things that I think he wants to see. But when you go back and look at it, just look at the last three that we've done. Cinderella, possibly the oldest folktale in existence. Alice in Wonderland absolutely changed children's literature and 100% has a giant effect on our culture to this day. And I think you can argue that Peter Pan is the same. And not because of the Disney film. The Disney film is part of that legacy, and it is a very big part of that legacy. But by the time the Disney film came about, it's been a stage play for eons, basically. Okay, 50 years. The reason Walt Disney loved this was because he saw a production of it. If you just think about it, because I was glancing through, like, the Wikipedia that said something about, like, references or in popular culture or whatever. And that's not even looking at, like, Hook and Tinkerbell and Pan. And there was a miniseries on Sci-Fi called Neverland. And all of these characters are in Once Upon a Time, the ABC show from a few years ago. We've got all of these retellings and adaptations. We've got another one coming from Disney because they're doing live actions of everything. Why not? I had just been talking to some of my friends about this movie from the 1980s called The Lost Boys, which is a vampire movie with Corey Haim and Corey Feldman and Kiefer Sutherland. That was a seminal moment in my childhood. And so we were talking about it and this movie because there were like only 2 or 3 of us in the room that actually had seen it. It did not occur to me until I read it on Wikipedia that the vampire movie, The Lost Boys, is named after the Lost Boys in Peter Pan. And that, like, it apparently has, like, just a ton of Peter Pan references and imagery.
Vampires also don't age.
Exactly. And that was the thing that, like, the screenwriters were actually doing on purpose. Vampires also never grow up. They don't explain it because it's a cultural reference that we all sort of understand. So he's picking things that aren't necessarily giving him a very stable foundation to build on, story building, world building wise. But at the same time, he's picking things that are, like, already building into a real public consciousness. When you ask somebody, what does Peter Pan look like? They do not think about the illustrations from the original Peter and Wendy from 1911.
No.
Peter Pan looks like Peter Pan in this movie. In everybody's head. That's how it works. And Wendy is wearing that nightgown. In everybody's head.
Yep.
Captain Hook looks like a Spanish fop because of this. This movie gave everyone the visuals to go with it. But there's things that I have no interest in actually reading the original. Like, I want to go back and reread Alice in Wonderland after watching the movie. I don't have any interest in picking this up for a lot of reasons. So I knew that in the epilogue of the book, Peter actually does not come back for Wendy at all until she's grown up and has a daughter of her own. And then he sees her daughter Jane and takes Jane to Neverland, and that's kind of the end. Apparently, there's a line in the epilogue where Wendy asks Peter about Tinkerbell and finds out that she died about a year after the events of the book. And Peter has utterly forgotten her existence.
Which is terrible.
Peter is such an asshole.
Yes, and also, okay, or is that the effect of Neverland? But if that's the effect of Neverland, then how did he remember Wendy?
Revisiting the Vault is a 9-Hour Films production, and it's edited by Mary Ratliff. Our music is by Music Motion and Lynn Publishing. We are not affiliated with or authorized by the Walt Disney Company. You can find us on Twitter at Revisit the Vault, and you can find our website at revisitingthevault.com. Don't forget to check out our Patreon. Patrons can get personalized thank you cards, stickers, and access to deleted scenes and outtakes. You can find that over at patreon.com/9hourfilms. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is to tell other people about the show, and make sure that you leave a review in whatever app you're using to listen. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.